Hello, in this video I want to continue some of the conversation that we've been having about Deleuze and Guattari for the last couple of videos. If this is your first time tuning into one of these videos, I would definitely say go back and watch the intro and the first part. The reason why I would suggest watching both videos is because I think that if you don't have a background in Deleuze and Guattari at all, the first video can be a bit helpful in letting you understand some of the terminology that you're definitely going to see if you debate this argument during this resolution, which I have also kind of made a case for in the last two videos for being a pretty prominent argument. And in this video I kind of want to continue that conversation and talk a little bit more about what that means in terms of like how you refute against policy affirmatives, which is the series I started in the last video. And so the last video kind of starts to introduce what I think are some of the core arguments I think are really important against the policy affirmatives that you'll kind of see when you're reading Deleuze and Guattari. And I definitely think that it's really important to kind of like use that as the place to start the conversation that we'll be having here, because most of the stuff that I'm discussing in this video will kind of directly come from the conversation that got started there. And so overall I think it's just like really important to have this stuff in the conversation and be able to talk about the various ways in which Deleuze and Guattari can kind of be used as an offensive argument on the negative, because I definitely think it's something to look out for if you haven't really seen it before, just because of the way in which the arguments that they're kind of making about the state recognition and its relationship to resistance and various types of movements is very central to like what the core kind of like controversy is for the resolution for the worker strike topic. So yeah, hopefully this will be really helpful. I think that if we're just continuing off from where we left off in the last video, I really want to start talking about the link debate. And I think that in the last video we kind of like started off by me giving the advice of just saying that I think that most of the offense that you want to make about the state and its relationship to the war machine and the ability to try to quell the war machine through like subsuming it into like how the into the state itself, via the state recognition of the workers' strike. I think that the way in which you kind of get to link diversification, which I feel like is people's number one problem when they read arguments like this, just getting stuck on that kind of like thesis level impact turn, is I think playing off the other team's advantages. I feel like a lot of the advantages that I could see definitely being read through this resolution are arguments about like democratic modeling, international governance, which I've talked about in a bunch of videos that I've done for this resolution. I think that there will probably be arguments about like diseases or like health related impacts, just because I feel like a lot of the arguments considering like the worker strike and stuff are usually about how things like workers' health insurance and stuff like that are taken away during strikes, and how various other forms of scarcity are produced. And I could definitely think that it could answer there are arguments that can be made about climate change as well, considering the types of conditions and other types of materials that workers may be working with or striking against because of their contribution to the environment, etc. And I think that all of those are really good options to really prepare for, and are things that Deleuze and Guattari I think have a really interesting time debating against, because I feel like a lot of the arguments that are being made about how they kind of correct the injustices of like lack of health insurance, of things like being able to like solve the commitments to climate change, etc., and things like that, all kind of invest in the same type of violence, which is how can you erase basically inequality for like this sector of wage laborers. But if you look at, for instance, when you think about things like the disease impact and stuff like that, the people that are already suffering most are those that are without jobs that wouldn't be in the conversation of the workers' strike, etc., in the first place, right? And so like these kind of like subtle, not really exclusions, but kind of like outside parameters that kind of change like how like basically palpable or how extensive the types of reforms that are being made by the affirmative are, I think are really good testaments to make about like why the state's kind of subtle recognition of the workers' strike doesn't actually do anything to correct like the worst of these types of abuses, and simply is made to make the state kind of like seem as this corrective force, when in actuality it already participates in like the sectioning and the creation of the inequality that's like resulted in the system existing in the way that it does in the first place, which I think is a really good set of arguments to start from. I also think that in the context of like climate change and stuff like that, there's so many arguments to make about why the historical relationship between the state and private institutions to secure their mutual like benefit and being able to continue to produce resource scarcity and to continue to invest in environmental managerialism makes it really easy for you to win links against like the vast majority of arguments I think people will make about like what would be done in the context of worker strike to correct things like this. And I feel like with most inequalities that teams will be able to list or kind of like go for as like the kind of like other impacts that they're reading along with this stuff is definitely something that is pretty easy I think to refute or find link arguments to, just because I feel like a lot of the arguments will be how can we correct the ways in which the state is already refusing to take responsibility in now, and and all of the arguments that you need to make is how does the 1AC's recognition of worker strike basically sidestep those states' kind of like responsibility in being able to like understand and basically resolve this violence, when in actuality they kind of like participate in the production of such scarcity and the production of not only the scarcity that is produced via like the various forces of production that the state legalizes, but also through like the state's ability to recuperate its own loss vis-a-vis things like the prison system, etc. All of conversations that we kind of had in like the abolition portion. I think then when you kind of like move on from that and get to like how do you get to answers to that from the permutation, setting up and just having this huge link wall is super important, but also being able to apply like the framing arguments that we were talking about before about why the justifications of the affirmative are so important allows you to make arguments about why even if in a vacuum the plan text makes sense along the same axes of whatever alternative you're offering, the permutation is basically the same process of consumption that you're like making sense of on the link debate, and your framing debate kind of makes it impossible for those type of justifications to be legitimized from the judge's perspective because of the ways in which they are basically the product of the ability to like do what the 1NC is kind of impacting from the beginning, which is quell the war machine, right? And then I think that it's really just a question of when you get to your impact comparison, how can you really like set and make these odds seem so important to the judge in relationship to the types of really material impacts that the affirmative team is offering. I think the impact comparison will be a really critical portion of this debate, and I think that a lot of the arguments that you really want to make are how does the kind of like production of the worker strike produce real impacts along the kind of like post-structuralist analysis that you're really giving. I feel like a lot of times when teams are reading like arguments that would be considered like high theory, they make it really hard for themselves to really want to sit and be able to articulate material impacts. But I think your ability to use material impacts as an example of what type of like theoretical apparatus you're really speaking to can be really helpful in getting judges to understand why there cannot be a valued life, why there cannot be an ethical form of living under the mode in which the kind of like affirmative team is offering, which I think is like super important. And I think that at an alternative level, a lot of the arguments that you can then make about like the ways in which the kind of like war machine has to exist on its own, and why the alternative is more of an impact turn to the affirmative that may be able to solve some of the impacts of the AF better, could be a really tricky way for you to engage a lot of these AFs, because I feel like at the alternative level, if you're really taking it from the level of just like, no, we want to be the worker strike that's never, you know, recognized by the state, and making arguments about why that, and making a lot of your alternative offense based off of like why recognition is so bad and why a different form of like organizing and what that kind of looks like does, then you have like a really set of important arguments to not only win that your alternative can't be permuted because there's a direct refusal of the kind of values of the 1AC, but also why you're still able to win inroads to various forms of solvency that are important to have the judges thinking about the material solvency for the debate as well, which I think is like kind of the best of both worlds that you're really able to access. Hopefully this video is helpful for you, and hopefully you'll be able to tune into more videos I'll be doing, and yeah, thanks as always for watching.